neglecting Big Ten football in this channel for about a month or two now, and it's really time to pick that back up now. And I think what's a better place to start than Minnesota football, who, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated programs in the entire country. And for the most part, they've been really consistent over the past couple seasons. And it all starts with PJ Fleck, right? Who was the head coach at Western Michigan for a number of years. And now in Minnesota, he's heading into his ninth season already. And here are just a couple of stats that really just kind of illustrate exactly what PJ Fleck has done for this program over this period of time. So Minnesota has produced 19 draft picks since he's taken over as coach, and is only one of 9 schools that have had a first or second round pick in the past 6 years. And I think this kind of goes about saying too, since the Board of Regents just agreed to a 1 year contract extension to 2030, primarily because when in the last coaching cycle, UCLA tried to go after PJ Fleck, and that's kind of when Minnesota had to hone down and say, okay, we'll give you an extension and kind of go from there. But I mean, it goes without saying, though. I think PJ Fleck is he's only 44 years old, right? So, and almost 10 years of coaching experience. So he's going to find a bigger job whenever he wants that. But maybe Minnesota can kind of take that next step up, because as I see it right now, they have all the talent to compete within the Big Ten. They don't have many glaring weaknesses. They have talent on all sides of the football and a relatively experienced team. And I think that's something to be really excited about too. But going into 2025 now, you know, I think Minnesota is going to be an exciting team. And I say that because, they do have a lot going for them. And I know, at least for me, when I sit down and look at this roster, I'd say the two biggest positions that I get really excited about is, number one, going to be the running back room. You have Darius Taylor, who I think is going to be one of the best running backs in all of the Big Ten. And you also have a couple other guys too, such as Marshall's AJ Turner, Washington's Cameron Davis, all coming in too, who are going to really be joining a really strong running back room. And I think that's something that really Minnesota definitely has to get better with if they want to kind of take that next step, especially given, Mac Brosmer, who was the transfer from the FCS powerhouse New Hampshire. I mean, he ran for about 1,500 yards, and he's a solid kid, but I think at the same time too, he was never one of those guys that I think could kind of take over a game. And kind of similarly, this year you have Drake Lindsey, who's a redshirt freshman, and I think he's going to be a kid that I think is going to be Minnesota's quarterback of the future, and they're going to have to start him this season. I mean, he's got a really powerful arm, he's got good size, and he has a really strong background in terms of his high school career out of Arkansas. So it definitely goes to show that I think Minnesota possibly does have their starter for the next couple of years, and I think they are going to be tested early, because when I look at this Minnesota team, I definitely think they do have to get better at running the ball too, to help out Drake Lindsey, because when you really don't have any running backs who haven't hit for 200 plus yard game, it definitely is a little bit concerning, considering that they did that 5 times in 2023 and 7 times in 2022. It definitely kind of sits there and makes me say to myself, that's something that I think they're going to have to address more. And I think that's something that PJ Fleck and his coaching staff plans on doing, because here's another good stat about their rushing attack. When Minnesota ran for more than 110 yards, they were 7-0. But when they couldn't get that rushing attack going, they ended up being 1-5. So for that to be such a big difference between the two, it definitely kind of say to myself, hey, if they can really get that going, and it's one of those things too where the Gophers have done a really good job at bringing in some quality transfers. They have 21 from there, primarily on the offense side of the ball. I'd say one of the big question marks I at least see offensively, aside from, I talked about Drake Lindsey a couple seconds ago. I really want to kind of talk about this offensive line for a second, because I'm really reluctant to kind of see how this goes, especially when you have a younger guy like Drake Lindsey in there. I really would like to have some reassurance that this offensive line is is really going to be stout, because right now, as it stands, Minnesota, there's just been a lot of variance throughout the past couple of seasons in terms of this offensive line. But the good news is you do have Greg Johnson and Ashton Bears, who are both going to be returning and have started multiple games last season. But you add a couple of transfer portals to kind of fill out the rest of that offensive line. And, I always get a little bit scared when I see that. And I get it. Day and age transfer portal. Yes, there's going to be transfers. I'm not saying you can never have a transfer. But when you have it in such a key position like an offensive line, and you have such young talent at other spots of the football field, it definitely kind of gives me a little bit of a pause. However, when I always ask myself, like, hey, Minnesota has so much other talent at other sides of the ball too, which leads me to talk about the wide receiver core real quick, because yes, I do think Minnesota is going to run the ball more. But fortunately, Drake Lindsey is going to have guys to throw to, right? Because now that Daniel Jackson, Elijah Spencer have been drafted and going to the NFL, Minnesota had a lot going on in terms of really be able to kind of add some key pieces that they can kind of put in immediately and give Lindsey some help. And with that said, they've added some really quality guys from some smaller schools, such as Javon Tracy, for example, from Miami, Ohio, who is one of the strongest, most consistent programs in the entire MAC conference. So that's definitely going to be a really strong get there too. And also you have Logan Loya and Malachi Coleman from UCLA, who weren't their top contributors necessarily, but at the same time too, a guy that you can definitely have some depth, definitely some guys that I wouldn't necessarily say that they're blue chip guys or top end quality talent like they've had in the past couple seasons. However, they're going to be serviceable. And, when you look at the rest of the schedule, it's definitely going to be good enough to say to yourself, hey, no matter what, Minnesota is going to be in these games. And that's something that I think if you're a Minnesota fan, you have to be excited about, considering that, when you think about PJ Fleck going into his ninth season, 58-39 overall, including 5 winning seasons and a perfect 6-0 in bowl games. So, I mean, the stats speak for themselves. And that's the thing about Minnesota, is that they're just such a grassroots type of program. And, when you're Minnesota and you're recruiting against the Ohio's of the world, the Minnesotas of the world, the Illinois, when it's just so brutally competitive, and you're trying to get kids from out of state too, it's just really difficult to kind of hone in on that and really find that balance too. And you can even see that in terms of the recruiting rankings over the past couple seasons. In 2025, they were 51st. In 2024, they were 34th. And in 2023, they were 43rd. So yes, there's always going to be some ups and downs in terms of recruiting. But I think the big trend, if you're a Minnesota fan, what I would kind of point out is just the overall more kind of honing in on the transfer portal in general, and more or less kind of relying on that. And when I say that to myself, it's good that you have kind of that even split of commits versus transfers is really positive. 27% in state, which is good. I mean, at the same time too, it's not like there's any other big FBS programs in Minnesota anyway, so it's not like you're competing too much there. But at the same time too, I think this coaching staff really is trying to find that balance. And I think you're also kind of asking yourself, hey, how can Minnesota become not just the 7-5, 8-4 team? How do they become a perpetual 9, 10, 11 win team that I think a lot of us are asking? They're saying, hey, it's not so much that they don't have the talent to get there. They just don't have some elite talent in particular spots that I would sit there and say to myself, okay, this is the difference between being just a good program versus a great program. And I'll touch a little bit on the squad defensively as well, which I would probably argue is definitely going to be their biggest strength going into the year, particularly their safety room. I love their safety room. And, you got to talk about Koi Perich for a second, who I think is one of the best football players in the entire country. Definitely is going to be a ball hawk, someone who's really talented too. Not to mention, you also have Kerry Brown, who was a redshirt freshman last year, somebody who's going to be alongside Koi Perich. And, when you have just guys like this too, I think teams in the Big Ten are just going to be a little bit more reluctant to throw those deep shots downfield when you have guys like Kerry Brown, like Koi Perich, and Aiden Gotsby too. I'll also give him a shout out. and Darius Green, who started multiple games last season too. So when you have those 4 guys back there, and you could probably plug them in into certain packages in the cornerback room too, I think that's something that's really special and something that I think Minnesota is definitely going to be using as their strength of their team. And I'll show a little bit of love to their defensive line too. I think primarily because the experience that they have. I mean, you have Jalen Redding, you have Devin Easter, who have both played for 800, 900 snaps. I mean, well experienced guys who I think are to be phenomenal leaders on the defense side of the ball, and guys that I think their coaching staff can really trust as they continue to build this up. And when you continue to add transfers from some smaller schools as well to kind of really continue to build on that depth and really just continue to improve as they work on getting better with getting a more consistent pass rush and things like that too. Because I think what was missing from Minnesota last year defensively is, I know at least for me, I love watching Minnesota's defense stopping the run. I think that's always been their bread and butter, something that they've always been really phenomenal with over the past couple seasons or so. I mean, you even say defensively, they're ranked 5th in the nation overall, 9th in scoring defense. And when you have those guys, and you have those guys that I just riled off, and you also have Anthony Smith too, and they add the guys in the transfer portal, I think it's going to be much more balanced as well. And I think you're going to be surprised with some of these younger kids on the defensive line and the edge that I think are going to be some immediate contributors and really cause some trouble for some of these passers that they're facing. But lastly, just to cap this off real quick, I just want to talk about their schedule. And what's really going to be Minnesota's focus this year is their road schedule. Particularly, I think their key game this year is going to be this October 25th matchup versus Iowa. Iowa's one of the toughest teams to play the entire country, particularly at home, just given just how consistent they are as a program. And anyone who's watched this show knows how much I love Kurt Ferentz, so you will never hear me say anything bad about him. But overall, I mean, I look at this road schedule and gosh, I just get a little bit scared seeing it. Because when I think to myself, okay, you play Cal September 13th. I've talked about Cal in this program. You can never write them off, to even despite the shit show that's going on with Justin Wilcox and all of that. Then a couple weeks later, you're October 4th, you're at Ohio State. And then I touched on the Iowa matchup. And then towards the end of the year, you go to Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, and then you're also on the road versus Northwestern too, which I don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that game's at Wrigley Field. So that should be a fun game to watch too. So if you ask me in terms of what Minnesota needs to do this year, I think most importantly, it's going to be 3 things here. Number one, that I just honed in on, this road schedule, they have to hone in on this. I'm not saying necessarily have to beat Ohio State and Oregon, but they got to play them competitively to really have a chance that really going 10-2 and possibly maybe flirt with a playoff spot if really all things got lucky. But you probably say to yourself, hey, you're probably looking at closer to an 8 or a 9 win season again too. But to me, the games I'm really honing in on, I think if you're in Minnesota, you have to find a way to beat Iowa. I think that if I can go into this knowing that you beat Nebraska at home the week before and then you beat Iowa, you go into it playing a right now I think is a pretty mediocre Michigan State team. Then you have a bye, and then you go into the game versus Oregon, possibly going into that game only having 1 loss. That could be a November 15th game that I think versus Oregon that a lot of people are going to tune in on and say, hey, if this Gophers team can really put it together, and Drake Lindsey is the player that I think that a lot of Gopher fans think that he's going to be, man, this is going to be an exciting team to watch. And I only anticipate Minnesota getting better from here, assuming all those things work out and PJ Fleck continues to stay in Minnesota. So let me know what you guys think in the comments in terms of where Minnesota is going to go from here. But I have to tell you, in terms of some of the most underrated programs in the country, you got to put Minnesota on that list. And I don't think they get enough love and recognition for what they've done in terms of their consistency, in terms of being able to develop players, and most importantly, just PJ Fleck too, because he's just such a fun dude to be around, just so enthusiastic and really just passionate about the game of football in general.